I loved a lot of things, and I did everything. I mean, I started as what we in those days called co-ed, very interested in partying and having fun, and went through an era of activism, and I loved all of the social aspects, regardless of what phase I happened to be in. But I was also part of the early group in what became the Honors College. I loved working on the honors work and having that opportunity to really get to know some faculty members who treated us as though they were really smart, and as though we were smart and we had to live up to it. And then also for me, I spent some time at the Ohio University Post, which was a very exciting place. Some of the brightest people around campus gravitated toward there. The student newspaper was the place to be in an era of activism. So that was a big part of my life too.
When you major in home economics at Ohio University in those days, you had to live in a home management house. And you cooked there, lived there, and did all the organization. Well, I could not do that. I had a child at home, and there were a lot of people coming back from the Korean War that were married also. So what they did is they worked out a course for me to use in my own home.
It was an intense period. It was a time when Ohio University was a site of a great deal of student activism, and here in many ways it was kind of wonderful because there was serious conversation all over campus, and on the campus green, groups of students talking, teach-ins with faculty and students sitting and talking and questioning what the country should look like, what should the university look like. There was such shock at the assassination and the war and some of the things that were happening that a lot of pretense was put aside and people engaged in learning and exploration and questioning with an openness and a bluntness that just isn't part of normal everyday life.
So this was the era of Jack and Jackie Kennedy, and they were campaigning when we were here. She was in West Virginia on the telephone and on the radio all the time, and you could call in and ask her questions. So it was a very, very exciting time to see that campaign, and that was the first time that Tom and I could vote in the national election.
You had to be in your room by 10 o'clock at night. If you, on a weeknight, on a weekend you could stay out till 12. If you were late for 15 minutes on a weeknight, that only happened to be once, you were confined to your room for 24 hours except for meals and classes.
I remember going to concerts in the Green. The Kingston Trio came. I said that was really exciting. But we had lots of fun things going on all the time, and I think we really used the campus. I loved going into the Baker Center. I mean, Tom and I always would go out and dancing, and we jitterbugged in those days. So a little bit of the twist and all of that. So, but the campus was great. It was just so much fun.
I was not a smoker, but if you were a smoker, women were not allowed to smoke standing up because that was regarded as unladylike. Women could only smoke sitting down. To go to the cafeteria, you had to wear stockings on a Sunday. You had to wear a skirt for dinner. You couldn't go to the cafeteria in pants. I just am staggered when I think about how different things are. But this wasn't just Ohio University. This is everywhere. And the idea was that part of our passage to professional success, to life success, was to be ladies, to be able to pass ourselves off in a gentrified community, and we needed to, the view was, we needed to learn how to act like a lady if we were going to be successful. And that's what, you know, the policy was intended to do, intended to help us know how to act. That changed entirely.
I remember registering for classes and it was long lines. That's what I remember. I thought, oh, I hate standing in line. So that was the big thing. No computers, nothing as far as registration. We had to type every single paper out, no whiteouts, nothing. It was quite, to do a paper was a big job. So it was really hard. We walked everywhere. I mean, we never ever drove the car, so we walked to campus. And I always said that kept me in great shape. And in those days also, they had no air conditioning in the kitchens. So I was cooking and working in this kitchen that was so warm.
There was a wonderful dean of women named Margaret Deppen. A wonderful, wonderful woman. And when she was the dean of women, she was responsible for enforcing these rules. And I think through her, I later got a little sense of why she felt it was important, because she wanted us to be able to go off and teach or be a journalist or whatever career we had and fit into the society that was there. From the very beginning, she wanted women to be able to succeed. And she changed her idea of what success meant in kind of real time. So having somebody like that who was sort of represented the establishment, but very early understood that the establishment didn't need to be there and was changing, that was kind of wonderful. And that created a role model for other women around campus. As Margaret put everything aside and said, this is nonsense, it made it possible for change to happen more quickly than it might have.
High school years were really very politically active. If you just think about what was happening in the late 60s and the 70s, you have, the war on poverty, you have civil rights, Vietnam, the hippies, rock and roll. All of these things are happening where there's a belief that young people had a voice and that voice ought to be heard, actually deserved to be heard, demanded to be heard.
There were so many ideas that were being discussed. I mean, the teach-in movement was very, very big. There was a lot of excitement, on the campus. I was very involved in the College of Fine Arts, and so there were a lot of artists and, that kind of finding your voice and your rhythm. But being introduced to a lot of different ideas and people.
We organized, we protested as we needed. We did flyers. The flyer would say, at Baker Center in the Frontier Room, there's going to be an explanation of what Roe v. Wade is, or the Equal Rights Amendment is, or what you have to do if you'd like to be involved. So that was all very, very important. It was, again, across lines. It wasn't about women. It was about people recognize that people should get equal rights, equal pay.
Being on campus in 1970, when the students were shot at Kent State, was a searing event. There was so much tension already in the air with the National Guard, with the tear gas, with all these things that really weren't supposed to be a part of your idyllic college education, right? But that was the world that we were living in. And I remember when it happened and actually looking in the windows and seeing, the messages, the news that was like just posted up there, and just feeling incredibly connected to a whole other group of students at another university, but we were all one, and being in solidarity with their experience and knowing that it was ours. But then for the university to shut down, and suddenly we were all like pushed into our own private spaces. We weren't collective anymore. We were like this. It was just a very odd way for that particular year to not really end. It just kind of went poof.
It was strange times. I still have pictures with the bookstores uptown, and the windows had been broken out, and the one picture I have, it's of National Guard troops on Court Street in that main intersection with the bookstores, the National Guard being out there and the windows boarded up because the windows had been broken out. We had really felt, talking among and between ourselves as things were developing, and certainly after Kent State, that things were still going along well at OU, as well as could be expected given the circumstances and given the times.
It was very controversial because we had just, we had Nixon out. We've got all of these Democrats now elected, which was historic for the nation. And we did have a TV in one of the lounges, and it would be on all the time. There's like the Tom Lehrer show. There are all of these kinds of things. So politics, political commentary the nightly news would always be on, but you waited for those things because they came on at only that time. The news is on at 6. This is when the news is on. You would argue about these things all night because it's much more interesting than doing the things you should be doing. And so it would be very intense with a wide range of political views.
I had come from a military family. Everything was, clean cut, and this is the way you did things. And suddenly I'm in this environment where there are a lot of hippies, being surrounded by people who also were breaking away from perhaps the way that they were always taught to think, and being asked to think for themselves, and actually trusting that maybe what I do believe here is fundamentally true.
It was an era where Title IX had come through. The National Organization of Women was really trying to recruit a bunch of people, very strident sort of time. And I didn't feel that sense at all here. At Ohio, we felt, that girls could do the same things as boys could do.
Because I ended up going into the Army shortly after graduation, that for the 2 years that I knew I would be committed to that, and because at the time, again, this was not the most popular time to be joining the military, the early 70s, so even within the military and each of the services, the number of women was a very small percentage, and actually it was regulated that the number of women in the service could be no more than 10% of the total force.
And I was a Pi Phi the 4 years I was here, and it was sort of, I loved it. I even became president of the chapter, and I think it sort of played into that need to organize and help motivate people and do all that stuff. But it was at odds with this other life that I was leading, all-nighters and hanging out with the artist and doing all these other things. But somehow I was able to make them both work. And I think, again, that's a gift that I took away from Ohio University, which is, you can be different kinds of the same person. You can find different things. Being a sorority woman and being a member of this hippie group of artists. It all worked.
What was it like in dating? What were expectations? Because at that time, we were the beginning of being able, we wore blue jeans and very low bell bottoms and things, and because the pill existed, because it was different, it wasn't about, can I take you out to dinner? It was close to that. Can we go to dinner and a movie? But it wasn't that formal. 90% of the time, it ended in a relationship. It didn't end in a boink, just a one-night stand.
And then it's also an all-cash economy. And Athens National Bank, which sat at the end of the street, you had to make sure everybody went and cashed their little check for $4 or $6 or whatever you needed to be able to do that. So lots and lots of things came to campus. Midnight movies for $1 were hugely popular. Actually, my first date with my now husband was for a Saturday night starting at 11:30 because he didn't want to have to pay for anything more than $1 for the movies, and so we had to only go to the midnight movies. But tons going on. It seemed like we had lots and lots of musical acts coming through. Fair bit of rock and roll, and some speakers, with some pretty big name speakers would come through. Attendance was very high at events, so it was a time when you expected to attend.
The fact that it was a small town, a place where people were really connected to the land in a very, very interesting way, or connected to communities that were being established here. That caught my imagination, and I kind of equated that with the beautiful rolling hills and the people who were coming from cities, you know, coming to Athens, Ohio. Something was getting to them. You know, I was hanging out with architects who were buying farms and then creating their own homes. A lot of musicians who were very much into that whole, the music scene, and you know, it was part of a bigger movement. So it was interesting to me just to see the specialness of this small town, which to me wasn't all that small.